The elevator rose to the 42nd floor. I stepped out clutching a resignation letter and a worn leather journal, 9 years of silent work tucked under my arm. Nolan Grant's office overlooked the skyline like a trophy case. He didn't look up from his phone. Wallace. What disaster needs my attention now? I dropped the envelope on his desk. He skimmed it, smirked, then laughed. You're quitting? At your age? In this market? He called to his assistant through the glass. Claire. Wallace is leaving. Pizza party. 9 years of solid technical support, he added, still smirking. Respectable. But innovation? That's not your lane. I met his eyes. There's a second document in the envelope. He flipped to the highlighted clause. Employee Development and Proprietary Materials Policy, Section 11.2. His own signature at the bottom, dated April 2021. You signed that 2 years ago, I said. Right before the compliance review. His jaw tightened. That clause doesn't apply to senior technical staff. You just called me support, I said, turning to leave. In 2 weeks you'll wish you'd read the fine print. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. I didn't go home. I sat in my car and opened the journal. On the first page, accepted, Stanford PhD. Program, Computational Systems. Response due September 20th. 7 years ago I'd had a future. Then Nolan pulled me into his office, all charm and false promise. You're not a researcher, you're a builder. Stay and I'll make you lead systems architect. Your name on every project. Patents. Recognition. I believed him. I turned down Stanford. I built Helion's entire predictive logistics framework from scratch. 19 months of nights, failures, and solo breakthroughs. One morning, after fixing a critical bottleneck at 4 a.m., I slept on the office couch just to deploy before sunrise. I never expected applause. But I assumed my work would speak for itself. Then, 3 months before resigning, I watched Nolan take the stage at a press briefing. I personally engineered the breakthrough neural routing architecture. My chest locked. That system was mine. Every layer, every line. A junior dev whispered, "Didn't you create that?" That night I opened my private archive. Time-stamped commits, annotated diagrams, voice memos. One recording played my exhausted voice. Resolved the data handoff lag. Deploy at 6 a.m. He hadn't just stolen credit. He'd rewritten history so completely I'd started doubting my own memory. Back in my apartment I dug deeper into the archive. Files dated back 6 years. Neural_routing_v0_initial_concept.txt core idea. Decentralized routing via real-time feedback. Nolan says it's overcomplicated. Prove otherwise. Then an unexpected email. Draft review, confidential circulation. Attachment. The Architect of Tomorrow, manuscript draft v4.pdf author. Nolan Grant. Chapter titles mocked me. The Night I Rebuilt the Core. 18 Months of Silence. My Journey Through the Neural Framework. He'd lifted my whiteboard sketches, my terminology, my 4 a.m. breakthroughs. Word for word that he wasn't just erasing me, that he was building his legacy on my bones. I closed the document, staring at the blank screen. This wasn't oversight. It was identity theft dressed as a memoir. He was publishing a book about his genius, built entirely on my exhaustion before the world ever knew my name. I reopened my archive and created a new folder. Evidence under primary. Voice memos, email threads, annotated diagrams, even the project nicknames only I used. I copied it all. I documented everything like someone recording their own erasure. But I wasn't disappearing anymore. From the back of my journal I pulled an old business card. Dr. Amelia Cross, CTO, Vanguard Solutions. 4 years ago, after a symposium, she told me, "When you're ready to work somewhere that values who you actually are, reach out." That night I sent one line. Subject, still interested. Body, you once said you wanted to know the mind behind the architecture. If the offer stands, I'd like to speak. I hit send. His story was fiction. Mine was about to become fact. Her reply came at 6:53 a.m. Let's talk. 9 a.m. Private meeting room, Vanguard HQ. By 8:30 I stood outside Vanguard's glass entrance. No marble, no ego, just quiet competence. Amelia waited by a frosted conference room, hair pulled back, suit sharp. No smile. Just a nod. You moved quickly, she said. I've been still for too long, I replied. Inside, she opened her laptop before sitting down. I remember how you structured that routing core. You didn't just write algorithms, you redefined anticipatory logistics. Her clarity startled me, not because it was kind but because it was true. I slid a USB drive across the table. Logs, notes, code, emails. All time-stamped. All mine. She plugged it in without ceremony. For the next several minutes she clicked through files silently, methodically. Her expression remained neutral, but I saw her eyes sharpen with each new document. Finally she looked up. You have everything you need to challenge those patents. I know, I said. But patents alone won't fix this. Amelia leaned back slightly, studying me. Then she opened a new file on her screen. I need to show you something. She turned the laptop toward me. A PowerPoint slide deck appeared, bearing Helion's corporate branding. The title slide read, Apex Initiative Q3 Deployment Plan. Below it, in smaller text, confidential, internal strategy only. I frowned. She clicked forward. Slide 4 displayed a detailed schematic of an advanced routing framework. Multi-layered, adaptive, geographically distributed. My chest tightened. I'd built that exact model 3 years ago. In my own time, in a side notebook I'd never submitted. I hadn't even completed the stress testing. They're planning to launch this in October, Amelia said quietly. Someone inside sent me this file 2 nights ago. For a moment I couldn't breathe. They're not just stealing my past, I said, voice barely above a whisper. They're preempting my future. Amelia closed the laptop and met my gaze directly. Then maybe it's time you take it back. She paused, then offered something nobody at Helion had ever given me. Control. Come to Vanguard. Full technical authority. Build your system the way it was meant to function. And when you're ready, my legal team will help you dismantle every fabrication they've constructed. For the first time in 9 years, I didn't feel like I had to justify my existence. I looked her in the eye. Yes. The alliance had begun. After accepting Amelia's offer, I expected the next conversation to focus on strategy and roadmaps. Instead, I received a cease and desist letter. It arrived at 8:40 a.m., less than 36 hours after I'd signed with Vanguard. The subject line was written in aggressive capital letters. Immediate legal notice, unauthorized disclosure of proprietary systems. I didn't flinch. I poured another cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table and opened the email methodically. Helion's legal department was apparently outraged. According to the letter, I was guilty of misappropriating confidential intellectual property and falsely claiming authorship of proprietary routing architectures. The language was bloated, aggressive, filled with vague threats about consequences if I continued to leverage or misrepresent derivative works developed within Helion Corporation. There was something almost comical about the desperation embedded in the phrasing. They were trying very hard to sound authoritative from a position of obvious panic. I leaned back, opened a second window, and navigated to a familiar PDF. Helion Internal Policy Handbook Revision 2021, Section 11.2. Intellectual Property Rights for Self-Directed Development. I'd written that section myself 3 years ago during a contentious internal audit. At the time, the company wanted to streamline documentation protocols, and I'd fought hard to include protections for non-billable, independently initiated innovation. It had been approved without objection by Nolan Grant himself. I pulled up the signature page. There it was, his digital signature, dated April 19, 2021. I composed a reply. Please refer to Section 11.2 of the Helion Internal Policy Handbook. Systems and documentation created by employees during non-billable research or self-directed innovation retain intellectual property rights with the originating party unless superseded by a separate contractual agreement. You signed this policy on April 19, 2021. No further clarification necessary. I attached a screenshot of the policy language and the signature page. No embellishments. No emotional appeals. Just facts. At 10:15 a.m. I received a message from Amelia. Saw the cease and desist. Helion is flailing. Our legal team is drafting a response. Unimpressed. She added a single emoji, a raised eyebrow. By mid-afternoon another email arrived. This one was different. Unmarked sender, no subject line, no greeting. Just a single sentence. They're attempting to suppress this. You have grounds. Check the commit logs from April last year. Below that, an email signature. Kevin Porter, former internal counsel, Helion Corporation. My pulse stayed steady. I opened my backup drive and navigated to a folder labeled April_commits. Inside, I found it. A version control record from 9:40 a.m., April 23rd. Timestamped under my personal credentials. Attached was the neural routing core schematic that Helion was now attempting to claim as theirs. Kevin had been part of the policy drafting team when Section 11.2 was created. He knew exactly what protections it contained. And now he was telling me Helion was altering internal records to erase my authorship. They couldn't defeat me with evidence, so they were rewriting the archive. I forwarded the file to Amelia with a brief note. Confirmation acquired. Time to move forward. Her response came within minutes. Tomorrow. You're not fighting this alone. I closed my laptop, folded my hands, and looked out at the afternoon skyline. The sun had shifted lower, casting long shadows across the buildings. Helion wanted me to leave quietly. But silence was no longer my default setting. It didn't take long for the consequences to surface. 8 days after the cease and desist, the first warning signs appeared. I was reviewing infrastructure designs for Vanguard's new adaptive platform when a message arrived from an unlisted number. It was a screenshot, low resolution, cropped hastily. But I recognized it instantly. A Helion system dashboard. Red text flashed across the top. Error. Demand projection mismatch with regional load handler. Timestamp. 9:05 a.m. Region 4 Southeast Corridor. No explanation. No sender identification. Just the image. I stared at it, then smiled faintly. They'd begun to unravel. At first I thought it might be a reporting error or a temporary glitch. But by 10:30 a.m. 2 more screenshots arrived, accompanied by performance logs. The patterns were unmistakable. Projected demand curves no longer matched actual consumption. Load balancing lagged behind, failing to adjust for new solar generation windows and overnight usage dips. In simpler terms, the system was guessing, and guessing wrong. That afternoon, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Colin, a back-end engineer still embedded in Helion's infrastructure division. He didn't elaborate, just sent a single question. Nora, were you the one who built the Pulse module? I paused. Pulse module? I'd never called it that. Why do you ask? His reply came quickly. Because it's missing. Missing wasn't a term you used lightly in production systems. Modules might malfunction, get overwritten during updates, or glitch during deployments. But missing implied something far more fundamental. I asked for a screenshot. Colin hesitated, then sent it. The error was specific. Fatal error. Core logic module not found. NW_logistics_pulse_v4.2. There was. My initials still embedded in the code. Still alive. 4 years ago I'd added that tag as a quiet signature. NW_logistics_pulse stood for Nora Wallace Logistics Pulse, version 4.2. The stable build of the demand prediction engine I'd developed after 8 months of iterative failure. It had been buried deep in the system architecture, hidden beneath layers of abstraction and renaming conventions. But it was the engine. The silent heartbeat that allowed the entire predictive framework to anticipate shifts rather than react to them. They'd scrubbed my name from documentation, reassigned internal credits, rebranded functions. But they'd never touched the core. Because they never understood it. I remembered the night I finalized version 4.2. 3 a.m. rain tapping against the windows. I'd been alone in the office, surviving on trail mix and lukewarm tea, rerunning the same stress test for the 14th time. When it finally passed without triggering any fallback protocols, I saved the file under that tag. I never thought anyone would notice. Now it was flashing across their error reports like a ghost refusing to stay buried. By 2 p.m. I had confirmation from another source. Helion had activated emergency protocols across 5 regions. All systems were operating in manual override mode, running without predictive capability. Nobody on the current team had access to the module. Not because it was encrypted, but because nobody had ever bothered to ask how it functioned. Someone tried calling me. Internal line, Helion switchboard. I let it ring. Then came the text. Can we talk? Systems failing. Nobody knows how to repair this. I stared at the message, then silenced my phone. Later that evening, I sat with Amelia in her office. She'd seen the same reports. Vanguard's monitoring systems had picked up the anomalies through public grid analytics. They'll either admit they can't fix it, I said quietly, or pretend nothing's wrong. Amelia leaned back. Either way, we don't chase. We build. Their collapse will speak louder than anything we could say. I nodded. For 9 years I'd been the invisible architect, the silent mind keeping everything operational. Now, without any press release, without litigation, without confrontation, the truth was surfacing on its own. And I didn't need to say a word. When your name disappears from the documentation but remains embedded in the infrastructure, there's a shift you can't purchase or fabricate. 2 weeks after the system failures began, Nolan took the stage at the Global Infrastructure Innovation Summit in Chicago. It was a keynote slot he'd secured months earlier, back when Helion's routing architecture was still the industry benchmark, back when people still believed he was the architect behind it. I hadn't planned to attend. Then an invitation appeared in my inbox. The conference organizing committee extends a guest pass in recognition of your foundational contributions to predictive infrastructure development. There was no panel assignment, no speaking slot. Just a reserved seat, center section, 5th row. Anonymous but intentional. I accepted. From my seat, I watched Nolan step into the spotlight beneath a massive projection screen. He wore a charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, the kind that photograph well under stage lighting. His smile was practiced, but his eyes scanned the audience like someone searching for reassurance. The title behind him read, Next Generation Predictive Infrastructure. Engineering Tomorrow. He began speaking. Smooth delivery, controlled gestures, just enough animation to appear relaxed. He discussed resilience, volatility, scalability. He used all the correct terminology. But I could hear it, the emptiness beneath the polish. For 9 years I'd crafted those narratives, built those frameworks, designed the technical foundation so he could stand in front of audiences and sound credible. Now, without that scaffolding, he was reciting memorized phrases without substance. A few heads tilted in the rows ahead. One man whispered to his colleague, "Is this just last year's presentation repackaged?" Another leaned forward, squinting at the slides. "Where's the technical depth? There's nothing new here." At 11:20 a.m., the moderator opened the floor for questions. Silence held for a moment. Then a young woman stood in the 4th row. Her badge read, Research Fellow, University of California. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Grant, wasn't this framework originally developed by your former lead architect, Wallace?" The auditorium went still. Completely, utterly silent. Nolan blinked. Nora was part of a collaborative team. I directed the core architectural vision. From the front row, someone muttered, "Pretty sure her name's still in the version 4.2 commit logs." Another voice from the side. "She presented this at the closed MIT symposium 3 years ago. I attended." Nolan's mouth opened but no sound emerged. I didn't move. I didn't smile. But inside, something settled. Not vindication, just equilibrium. He tried to recover, pivoting to vague language about collaborative innovation and team-driven breakthroughs. But the room had already turned. What had been polite attention became a quiet current of skepticism and shifting posture. The next question came from a researcher at a German logistics institute. "Could you walk us through how your system manages dynamic constraint layering across microregions?" Nolan hesitated. "We employ adaptive layering strategies for real-time optimization." It wasn't an answer. The researcher knew it. He nodded once, unimpressed, and sat down. By the 5th question, the rhythm had collapsed entirely. People checked their phones. Someone in the back row stood and exited discreetly through the side door. I glanced at the program booklet. The next session was titled, Ethics and Attribution in Technical Leadership. I stood before Nolan finished. As I moved up the side aisle, I heard the moderator thanking him. The applause that followed was brief, scattered, and polite in the most damning way. Outside, sunlight broke through the overcast sky. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept walking, phone buzzing in my bag with messages I didn't need to check yet. For the first time in 9 years, the world didn't need me to explain who I was. They were beginning to remember on their own. I left that conference hall with the sound of hollow applause still ringing faintly behind me. But applause doesn't rewrite patents. It doesn't restore your name to the work you built. For that, I needed documentation and signatures. 3 days later, I sat across from Amelia in Vanguard's legal operations room. The walls were covered with white boards filled with dates, version numbers, and filing references. Their lead patent attorney, Helen Ortiz, navigated through a file directory projected on a wide screen while another lawyer typed rapidly at a corner workstation. Before we file a formal challenge, Helen began, we need to establish 3 elements. First, you created the work prior to their patent submission. Second, it was genuinely novel. Third, it had demonstrable application potential. I have commit logs, I said, already opening my laptop. Time-stamped and linked to personal development environments. I also have 7 emails where I explain the optimization architecture to Nolan, including attached diagrams. Show me the one with the phase shift routing logic, she said. I pulled it up. Helen reviewed the files, her expression shifting from neutral to focused intensity. You weren't exaggerating, she said finally. This is strong evidence. But it wasn't sufficient. Not yet. That afternoon, Amelia brought in an external consultant from Berkeley's Technology Verification Unit to help validate the origin timeline. We needed more than code. We needed irrefutable proof of authorship, something that couldn't be altered, recompiled, or backdated. I might have something, I said slowly, reaching for an old cardboard box I hadn't opened in over 3 years. Inside were several notebooks from my time at Helion. Physical paper notebooks. Most contained rough sketches, half-formed concepts, system diagrams. But in one, spiral-bound with a faded blue cover, I found a page that made me pause. Dated 5 years earlier in my own handwriting, was a full-page schematic labeled Handoff Correction v3 Adaptive Load Routing with Convergence Windows. Below it a signature, N. Wallace. And in the margin a timestamp, 4:18 p.m. I forgot I even signed this, I whispered. Amelia looked over my shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly. You documented this before they filed anything. This exact structure appears in their core system. We submitted the page to Dr. Ellis, the third-party verification specialist. He conducted forensic analysis on the ink composition, pressure patterns, paper aging, and date consistency. 48 hours later, the report returned, authentic, unaltered, unmistakably original. The legal team updated our case documentation. Helen scheduled a private strategy session at 9 a.m. the following morning. We proceed with a formal prior art challenge, she declared. Filed with the U.S. Patent Office by end of week. If they contest, we're prepared to escalate publicly. Nobody wants their name attached to fraudulent IP filings. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the reality. Not as a victim anymore. As the inventor. As the author reclaiming her work. You understand what this means? Amelia asked after the attorneys left the room. I do, I said, voice steady. It means I finally stopped being erased from my own narrative. She smiled faintly. Then let's dismantle the entire fabrication. By 2:30 p.m. the paperwork was submitted. The filing read, Inventor, Nora Wallace. Claim of prior authorship for algorithmic systems referenced in Helion Patent 9247183C. Attached were scanned commit logs, original email correspondence, early technical sketches, and the now verified schematic bearing my signature. I stared at the final confirmation screen, then clicked Submit. A simple action, but it carried 9 years of silence behind it. Later that night, I stood in my apartment watching city lights flicker in the distance, phone in hand, pulse faster than usual. I wasn't waiting for Nolan to respond. I wasn't anxious about Helion's legal team. I was waiting for something deeper. The moment my name finally stood beside the work I had built. Not as a footnote. Not as an obscured contributor. But as the origin. And this time the proof was written in ink that had never belonged to anyone else. The email arrived at 7:32 a.m., just as morning light cut sharp angles across the conference table at Vanguard. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee when the subject line appeared in bold. Patent Dispute Coverage Industry Insider. Amelia slid her tablet toward me without speaking. On the screen was a headline. Helion Corporation's algorithm patents under scrutiny, former engineer claims misattribution. There were no celebrations, no smug satisfaction. Just a heavy electric stillness in the room. This wasn't victory yet. It was a spark in a room full of accelerant. I read each line with deliberate calm. The article outlined my formal patent challenge filed days earlier. It cross-referenced timestamps, internal correspondence, and noted the suspicious timing of Helion's patent submissions, many filed shortly after presentations I had delivered at internal briefings. One paragraph quoted an unnamed source. The name on the filing isn't always the name who wrote the code. Outside, the city continued its usual rhythm. Inside that room, it felt like something fundamental had shifted. Then the dominoes began falling. By 9 a.m., engineering forums were dissecting every patent linked to Helion's logistics optimization platform. Comments flooded in. Wait, wasn't Nora Wallace the architect behind the NW Pulse system? I worked there 4 years ago. She ran every technical review. Nolan barely contributed. Then came the message that made me pause. An email from Evan Burke. Subject: It's time I spoke up. I hadn't heard that name in years. Evan had been one of the original optimization leads back when Helion was still a scrappy operation with ambitions larger than its infrastructure. He was methodical, brilliant, and exactly the kind of engineer Nolan never knew how to manage properly. His message read: 6 years ago, I was pressured to refile one of my core patents under executive alignment. They asked me to remove your name from the submission. I still have the original with both our signatures. Yours listed first. They made me erase you, Nora. I haven't slept well since. The attachment was there. A scan of the original application time-stamped with our signatures. Mine in black ink. His in blue. It felt like looking into a mirror I hadn't known was covered. I forwarded the file to Vanguard's legal team immediately. Their response arrived within minutes. This changes the entire landscape. We'll have it notarized and included in the case documentation by this afternoon. Amelia leaned back, arms crossed, expression sharp. That's the first thread. Pull it and everything unravels. I thought about the silence Nolan had always kept me in. How I'd been his ghostwriter, his invisible architect. How many others had been rewritten the same way. I wasn't alone in this. That realization didn't comfort me, it focused me. Because if they could erase my name, they could erase anyone's. Evan's testimony was just the beginning. More voices would emerge. Quiet builders. Buried brilliance. By 10:15 a.m. another article appeared. Engineering Quarterly published an investigation detailing how Helion had restructured its research divisions at key patent milestones, suspiciously coinciding with sudden executive innovations. By noon, hashtags were trending. Hashtag who built Helion, hashtag credit the engineer, hashtag Nora Wallace was first. I didn't respond. I didn't repost. I didn't engage with any of it. But I did open a fresh folder on my desktop and labeled it Restoration. And I returned to work. The headlines hadn't stopped. Each day brought new articles, new testimonies, new cracks in the facade Nolan had spent years constructing. Helion's innovation under fire. Key patents face challenges. Former engineers speak out. Each piece chipped away at the empire he'd built on my work. Yet as the black sedan pulled up in front of the Grand Harbor Convention Center, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Just a cold, crystalline calm. I was here to speak. Not to settle scores. As the driver opened the door, my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me I'd recognize the voice. I answered. Nora. It's me. I said nothing. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, Nolan continued, his voice strained and threadbare. But please. I need your help. Nolan Grant, the same man who had laughed in my face at 8 a.m., told me I wasn't executive material, and repackaged my entire body of work under his own name, was now calling me on the morning of the biggest industry conference of the year, sounding like a man seconds from collapse. I'm speaking at 1 p.m., he said, voice cracking slightly. They're expecting a detailed presentation on the adaptive logistics model. The slides, half of them don't make sense to me. I can't answer technical questions about the core architecture. I can't even explain the convergence mechanics. There was a long pause. You were always the one who made me sound credible. If you could just send me a few talking points. Even one of your diagrams. Nora, I'm asking. I looked out the tinted window. Just across the plaza, banners for the International Systems Innovation Summit waved in the breeze. The marquee above the convention center entrance read, Opening Keynote. Nora Wallace, CTO, Vanguard Solutions, Reimagining Adaptive Infrastructure. Below that, in smaller letters, Guest Panelist, Nolan Grant, Helion Corporation. The car was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't require filling. The driver waited without looking at me. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse didn't spike. I'd spent too many years reaching this level of stillness. I remembered another time. 4 years ago, after I'd finalized version 4.1 of the optimization architecture. Nolan had leaned into my workspace and said, "You know, you're the engine, Nora. I'm just the face." I'd smiled then. Foolishly. Because the very next week, a patent application was filed. His name at the top, mine buried in the acknowledgement section. Now he was asking for help with work he'd never understood. And I was finally done being the engine for someone else's vehicle. "I'm sorry, Nolan," I said quietly. "But I have my own presentation to prepare for." "Nora, please. I know I made mistakes, but this will destroy me. Maybe you should have considered that before signing your name to my algorithms." Silence again. But this time it wasn't mine to carry. I ended the call. As I stepped out of the car, a conference coordinator approached with a headset and clipboard. "Ms. Wallace, welcome. Your preparation room is ready. You're first on the main stage." "Thank you," I said, following her through the double doors. Just before we turned the corner into the speaker preparation area, another staff member hurried up with a revised program printout. "We've made one final update," she said. "Mr. Grant's role has been adjusted." I looked down. Panel guest only. No presentation slot. Scheduled status. Pending availability. I smiled. Not from cruelty. From clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was simply gravity pulling false constructs apart. Inside the preparation room, Amelia was waiting, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "He called you, didn't he?" "He did. Did you give him anything?" I shook my head. "No. I don't do ghostwriting anymore." Amelia raised her cup in a silent toast. "Then let's get you ready. It's your voice the world's finally prepared to hear." And for the first time in 9 years, I walked toward the stage knowing that every word I spoke would be mine. The roar of the audience faded behind the curtain as I stood centered, waiting. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. Not anymore. Not after 9 years of silence. Behind me, the screen displayed my name in clean white text. Keynote speaker. Nora Wallace, CTO, Vanguard Solutions. I took one step forward, then another. Stage lights warmed my face as I emerged into full view, the applause rising, steady, respectful. I walked to the center, stopped at the podium, and looked out into the sea of faces. Engineers, researchers, executives. And in the third row, Nolan Grant, barely blinking. I didn't rush. I let the silence settle, not as hesitation but as ownership. 9 years ago, I designed a routing architecture in a basement lab with second-hand processors and insufficient funding for real-time testing. Everyone said it was premature, too ambitious, too theoretical. A few nods. Some eyes widened. They didn't know yet where I was heading, but they were listening. "But what if theory isn't ahead of its time?" I asked. "What if it's time that needs to catch up?" I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen shifted. A dynamic simulation unfolded. A 3-dimensional logistics grid adjusting in real time to simulated demand surges and geographic variables. "This," I said, "is the Wallace adaptive model. Built on predictive terrain-aware distribution and decentralized logic. It learns. It shifts. It adapts." The audience leaned in. Nobody checked their phones. This model was dismissed as impractical until last year, when someone else began preparing it for launch under a different name. I paused, then pulled a folded piece of paper from inside my jacket pocket. "I'd like to read a short passage," I said. "It's from a draft manuscript titled The Architect of Tomorrow." My voice remained steady as I read. "Innovation is the product of clarity under pressure. The routing model we built was born from solitude, sleepless nights, and a mind that never stops iterating." I looked up. He wrote that. But I lived it. A few people turned toward Nolan now. He sat stiffly, one hand clenched in his lap. "This passage, word for word, was lifted from a notebook entry I wrote 5 years ago," I continued. "A page I found time-stamped in my own handwriting. And the system he called his was built from algorithms I designed in silence while his name appeared on the patents. I clicked again. The slide changed. A scan of the notebook page appeared. My handwriting, the same passage, dated and authenticated. Gasps. Murmurs. Then something shifted. Applause began, slow at first, then building from the back of the room, deliberate and undeniable. I let it happen. Let the noise rise. I didn't force it. I didn't need to. I stepped back from the microphone and finished simply. I'm not here to reclaim credit. I'm here to stop being invisible. This is the work. This is the truth. And this time it has my name on it. I walked off stage before the applause peaked. I didn't need the ovation. In the wings, Amelia was waiting. You did it, she said. No, I replied, voice calm. I finally said it out loud. The applause had faded. The headlines had settled into background noise. And for the first time in years, I was alone in my own office, surrounded by silence that didn't sting. It was 8:30 a.m. when I opened the last drawer in my new workspace at Vanguard. Morning light spilled across my desk, catching the edges of a thick cream-colored envelope tucked beneath a blueprint portfolio. No return address. But I didn't need one. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Slanted, too precise to be casual, too rigid to be warm. Nolan. I held it for a moment before opening it. There was no ceremony. Just a folded letter handwritten in black ink. A slight smudge on the bottom corner as if he'd hesitated before sealing it. I don't know if you'll ever read this. For 9 years I presented your work and called it leadership. I've come to realize it was cowardice. The next paragraph was scratched out, then resumed. You did the building. I did the talking. Somewhere along the way I convinced myself the face mattered more than the engine. But now I know the truth. Without you there was never any substance behind the presentation. I read the final lines twice. I'm sorry. Not just for what I took, but for making you feel like you had to stay quiet to be heard. That was wrong. That was it. No request for forgiveness. No plea for redemption. Just ink finally admitting what truth had been screaming for years. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not in pain. In peace. This wasn't closure because he'd asked for it. It was closure because I no longer needed it from him. I folded the letter, set it aside, and reached for the blueprint binder beneath it. Inside was something far more alive than any apology could offer. A new system I'd been quietly designing for nearly 7 months. Built on real-time logistics flow, environmental modeling, and AI-enhanced forecasting. It wasn't a continuation of Helian's framework. It was a breakaway. The first page bore a clean title block. Project codename, Wallace Core AI 1. I smiled. Tucked into the corner pocket of the folder was a sticky note from Amelia. Board-approved Phase 1 funding. Let's build something they can't erase. I looked back at Nolan's letter for a moment, then placed it gently in the drawer beside the binder. Not to hide it. Not to cherish it. But because every journey needs its origin marked. Especially when the path ahead has no ceiling. The drawer clicked shut with quiet finality. I stood and crossed to the window. The city stretched outward in quiet motion. Buses hummed. Cyclists coasted by. Another day moved forward. My phone buzzed. Amelia, still good for 1 p.m.? Launch timeline review. I texted back. Wouldn't miss it. I took one last look around the office. Not just at the tools and plans, but at the space that finally felt like it had room for me in it. And as I turned off the desk light, the soft reflection on the drawer's metal handle caught my eye. It glowed faintly in the morning sun. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind me. The fire hadn't gone out. It had simply changed hands. This time nobody else would carry it for me. And nobody else would need to.